on the latest news and developments in America because it's all quite fast-paced, isn't it? There's daily revelations of additional crimes, and there's a lot of problems that Trump is having to contend with. And we're also on tenterhooks to find out what will the implications be for America and for global security. We come to understand more how Trump and Trump's enablers are jeopardizing the world order, and a global world order that arose after the fallout of World War II, when a lot of nations formed the United Nations, the NATO alliance was formed. A lot of things were put in place to try and protect asylum seekers so that never again would you see a situation such as you had during World War II, when a boat full of Jewish refugees from Europe on a boat called the St. Louis were turned away, first from Cuba, because they'd had valid visas when they left Europe, and when they arrived near a Cuban port, those visas had been rendered ineligible. So they went to America and they were turned away. And they were turned away from a lot of different countries, and the boat of hapless refugees was sent back to Europe. Various European countries took them in, but of course those various European countries were also invaded by Germany. So a lot of the Jews on that boat ultimately perished as a consequence of being in European countries when German invaders were rounding up Jews and executing them. Let's have a look and see if we can see an update. Oh, we can see support for Trump impeachment continues to escalate. So it sounds like the sound for that is working, and I've got 63 subscribers. Thank you all, chaps. There's no online chat, but that's fine. We will work on that. What's the critical thing that we think is happening at this point in time? We are hoping that a majority of people in America who haven't been following Twitter or the news as obsessively as some of us do, that those people begin to pay attention because of the nature of impeachment and the effect it seems to have on Trump, which is to make him startlingly more loud and far-fetched in his language choices. So when he starts to say Adam Schiff should be found guilty of treason, I tell you, because he dared to characterize Trump's remarks in the transcript as being like a mob boss. And he said this is in essence what Trump did in that conversation. He said, we have something that you really need. And it was something that Ukraine really needed, a lot of military aid. And that was the precursor to the conversation happening in the first place. Ukraine knew that there was aid on the line. They knew that specifically that because Trump's diplomats had been telling them that Trump will not meet with you. Trump will not go to Ukraine for an important state visit. You will not be invited to the US for a state visit until you have the deliverable that Trump wants, which is a promise to make a public declaration about investigating Joe Biden's son. So they didn't really need an investigation to transpire. They needed an announcement. They needed a marketing effort to contribute to Trump's re-election campaign, to say, my political opponent has a son who was paid a salary for being on the board of an electric gas company that wanted to redeem its image and wanted somebody with a famous parent, a well-connected parent on board. There is Joe Biden, when he advocated for the dismissal of a Ukrainian prosecutor, Biden was acting in concert with many, many people in Europe, European leaders such as Angela Merkel, to get rid of a prosecutor who was facilitating corruption rather than addressing it. So Trump is very good at derailing a conversation. He's very good at pushing propaganda, making a story simple, even when it's a complete fabrication. It's easy to sell stories when you're Trump because you aren't fettered by the complexities of reality. You pick the thing you want to lie about, and you tell that lie, and you repeat that lie. And that's 101 of how to fascist. Another thing you do in Fascism 101, is you invert victimization. So you oppress people, and all the while you complain that you are the world's biggest victim, that everybody's so mean to you. People who lived in Germany under Hitler reported that Hitler constantly created drama. He was constantly talking about enemies, internal and external enemies. So they were constantly off balance, having to contend with the idea of these threats they were being told about by a leader who was prepared to lie for his own political advancement, and who was prepared to scapegoat minority groups for his own political advancement, out of his understanding that you can capitalize on the worst in human nature for political advancement. You can tell people, all of these problems, all of your anxieties, all of your hurt pride, I can fix that for you, because I will tell you that you are the most special, important race of people in the world, that you deserve to be prioritized, and I will put Germany first. That is my assurance to you. Diplomacy is not going to be complicated anymore. Germany first. Wars aren't going to be complicated anymore. Just Germany first. Jews aren't going to be complicated anymore. We put them in prison, all to make you feel more special because you're not Jews. They're criminals, they're Jewish. And you can build on half-truths, less than half. You can build on truths that are 100th truth, that there are a few criminals in Germany who happen to be Jewish, and you take their picture and you put it in a weekly newspaper, as Hitler did, and you publish it showing crimes committed by Jews. And there can be real crimes and real Jews, but when you take that torchlight of propaganda and shine it on a demographic group, when all demographic groups have elements of people that commit crimes, there are criminals in every demographic group, and it plays to our tendency to want to believe bad things about groups of other people. It plays to our worst tendency to believe that loyalty is proven by all being a member of the same group. Like, oh, Catholic priests must be good because they're Catholic like us, so of course they wouldn't harm children. White Christian people, you must be good if you're a Christian. You couldn't possibly do anything wrong. We're all loyal to each other because we're all white, so we're afraid of black people because they can't be loyal to our country. They're not one of us. And that type of destructive, racist, xenophobic thinking is destructive because it erodes the capacity to build loyalty out of a perception of common destiny. And so many Americans have worked so hard for so long to develop that sense of loyalty based on adoption of common values. So here we are celebrating America. We respect migrants. We welcome migrants. We believe in migrants being able to move to this country and adopt this country as their own and seek to promote it and seek to advance it. So migrants serve in our military. We embrace them. We don't exclude ethnic or demographic groups from military service or from participation in public life. We don't allow people to discriminate, to put signs up on shops anymore that say black people aren't allowed, or Irish people aren't allowed, or Jewish people aren't allowed. That's something that America is so proud to have moved beyond. But not enough truth and reconciliation processes happened in America. And too many people in the South were allowed to fester in their rejection of the North's victory, to fester in their resentment that slavery was ended, and to long for a continuation of their ability to subjugate people of darker skin. Slaves brought over from Africa. They want to believe that they did nothing wrong to enslave Africans. They want to believe that slavery was necessary and was fine because those people are somehow less worthy of human dignity and freedom and liberty than other people on American soil. And they're all wrong, and it's all lies, and oppression didn't end with slavery. There were years of Jim Crow, there were years of lynching, there were years of negative consequences as a result of the psychological failure of many people in the South and the Midwest and even the North to accept that slavery was not good, slavery was not necessary, slavery was bad and condemnable. And for people who can't process that, who can't understand that, they can't see their way to helping repair some of the damage by at least providing reparations, which is using some of the wealth that in part was instigated and built by the unpaid labor of African American slaves. So instead of reparations, that would have been at least a token effort that would have pushed people down a pathway of acknowledgement that slavery was a governmentally endorsed social ill. Without that acknowledgement, people continue to delude themselves about the outcomes of slavery and the years following it, and the patterns of systematic and institutionalized oppression, the exclusion of Black Americans from economic opportunity, the way it was legal to refuse African Americans a mortgage simply by virtue of their skin color and their racial background, to perpetuate the idea that Black people were lesser than white people and therefore entrench their economic exclusion from opportunity. So everybody in America whose grandparents may have been able to take out a mortgage, to get a loan from the bank and then translate that into acquiring an asset, a large asset such as property, and a piece of property that appreciates in value, that grows wealth, that can then be passed on intergenerationally. So your children can inherit the wealth that you have created and expanded by virtue of translating your ability to be friendly with a bank and be endorsed and validated as a human being and obtain a loan, to trade off your ability to have stable employment, to prove your worthiness, your conscientiousness, to trade off your merit as a person into a loan that you can use to enrich not only yourself but your family in the future, due to the properties of property to appreciate in value, i.e. gain value over time. And yes, so Marianne Williamson was a presidential candidate. Oh, I think she's still in the race. She was getting a lot of positive attention because she did at least touch on those issues. She is also a crackpot who doesn't believe in vaccination and thinks people should will themselves out of diseases. So that lady be cray, but at least she acknowledged the emotional reality of American history and American present, that too many people have deluded themselves about the nature of institutionalized historic crimes against African Americans that have excluded them from economic opportunity, as well as enslaving them, as well as lynching them, as well as having a judicial system that was often set up to protect some people and also bind other people. So African Americans are more likely to be prosecuted for failing to adhere to the law. So celebrities or white people can smoke marijuana and they're less likely to be prosecuted. They're more likely to be protected from property theft. Black people imprisoned as a consequence of marijuana sale. And it's always hurt me when I see celebrities talk about their marijuana use and talk about it with impunity, knowing proportionally in America how many African Americans are in jail because of their experience and exposure with that drug. So if you use marijuana and you don't in the same breath say, I can admit to this in public and say I'm just joking or whatever and not be prosecuted for my open drug use, whilst poorer people and people of color are literally in jail serving long jail sentences as a consequence of their use of this same substance that I am currently admitting to smoking or ingesting or something. The tragedy and blatant disregard for the welfare of those people was bad, continues to be bad. At least Kamala Harris says there should be a degree of restitution. All of the industries that are opening up in states, American states that have legalized marijuana, there should be special provisions made to release people in jail serving time for marijuana-related crimes and to allow those people first in line access to some of those business opportunities as a form of redress for the injustice of having disproportionately imprisoned people of color. As a unconscious or conscious way of systematically perpetuating injustice against African Americans, making them more subject to the rule of law but less protected by the rule of law. When people realize that so much of Trumpism and so much of Republican support is fueled by a need to have psychological coherency on the part of racist people. They want their world to make sense, and they need to feel that there's a social order in which has a hierarchy to it, almost like the caste system in India, where you are more worthy, you are more inherently worthy if you're white, and as if along eugenics principles, you are less worthy if you are black. You are more like, they would have you believe that you are more likely to be criminal, etc., because of your skin color and your genes. Whereas entrenched poverty in some areas, some sections of the African American community, mean that there are social demographic factors which may pertain to an increased proportion of people committing crimes, but also an increased rate of prosecution of people if they happen to have the misfortune of being African American in the context of a racist application of the law. Then yes, it is to a degree a function of poverty, entrenched systematic poverty, exclusion of predominantly African American communities from service transport infrastructure. So highways that bypassed African American communities because those designers didn't want to service those communities. And we should note that its votes and the ability to vote is associated or a direct link to political power. If Republicans are getting away with suppressing the voting ability of African Americans, then they don't get to elect representatives who acknowledge the needs of their community, who help them prosper at an economic level, who help them be serviced by public infrastructure such as public transport systems or roads that actually go through your community instead of going on a highway overpass over the top of your community, so that you're not serviced. You can't have trucks that stop at your town. You can't drive to work. You don't become part of an economic hive of activity. You are excluded. These are all things which I have learnt more about in the last 2 years, so I understand that everybody has their own journey and their own path to learning about some of this historical and current happenings. But it's key that we all pick up the pace of learning what motivates Trumpists and what motivates Republicans, who are so lost to reality that they will continue to watch Fox News to stay on a hamster wheel of reinforcement that their understanding of the world is correct. They need to keep seeing footage of black people committing crimes on Fox News to validate what to them is common sense, that black people are less worthy, that black people are inherently more likely to commit crimes because of their genetic composition, that there's something inherently wrong with people of color. It's not true, it's a fabrication, and the more they need to feed off that fabricated reality, the more vulnerable they are to the lies of a con man who enters politics and tells them everything that confirms their reality for them. Everything that says, no, we're not judging you for being racist. You're not racist, you just understand how the world works. All of the implications of eugenic philosophy that have been ingrained in Fox News and Breitbart and right-wing radio for so many years. That's all true and right. And Trump will prove it by restoring white people, to their proper place on a social order. He will do all this for you. That is the implied promise of Trumpism. And when we note their fanatical devotion to Trump, that is a very human tendency to cling to being right even when you are demonstrably wrong and deluded. The more you tell cultists that they are in a cult, the more they say, you don't know the truth, we know the truth, and we're special, we have privileged access to truth that you cannot understand and relate to because you are blind to the truth. You listen to the fake news, that's what our president told us. This is all fake. The Washington Post isn't even a real paper. That's what Trump said. Was it yesterday or the day before? Anyway, if you've listened to this one-sided conversation, let's see if there have been any chat messages while I've been talking. Oh, yes. There were. Good morning from San Diego. Thank you. Someone called Eve says she thinks what is worse is the cut sentences from celebrities and leaders, Huffman University scandals, etc. I don't mind people getting short sentences. I mind more that people get long sentences. So it's not the hypocrisy that bothers me, it's the long sentences in the first place. Because yes, I don't think jail is a very good avenue for justice unless it's people who the public really do need protecting from, such as repeat murderers, etc. So yes, I don't think Crystal Mason, who got a 5-year jail sentence in Texas for voting, doing what she perceived to be her civic duty, was her civic duty, except for some bloody proviso that you're not apparently allowed to vote in Texas while you're on parole. And she wasn't aware of that, and people probably lied about whether or not they mentioned that proviso to her. I'm sure they didn't. And they lied to court and said that they did, so that they could get another black woman committed to jail. That's how racism works. You lie, you said, yes, I did my job. I highlighted the proviso that said don't vote if you're on parole. She thought she needed to vote. She did her civic duty. She's undergoing a 5-year jail sentence. The number of black women who've been committed to jail for very minor infractions, like using their father's address to apply for a school so that their children could go to a better school. Whereas, yes, that entire jail sentence is wrong to me. Not that Felicity Huffman's sentence is too light. My focus is on the sentences that are too harsh. They should be fixed. And things don't get fixed just by complaining about hypocrisy, because that sounds like adversarial behavior where you're just, rather than having a principle you want to promote, you're just saying, I'm complaining about you, you're terrible because you were a hypocrite. So instead of complaining about behavior, we want to say excessive jail time is bad. That's our argument. Eve says, don't mind me just babbling. Someone called Pompeius Magnus says, long taxpayers are also expensive for taxpayers. Yes, it is true, and criminals or people who've committed a crime are often persecuted, not because the criminals need to be kept away from the public, not because the public needs protection from certain type of criminals, and not because it works as a deterrence, but to sell a story to the public that you can be classified as good people and bad people. So the bad people are in prison, don't worry about them. And the consequences of that taught disregard for people in jail are that sheriffs in certain red states are legally able to personally enrich themselves by underspending on the care and feeding of inmates who can't go out and access nutritious food for themselves. They're compelled to eat what the prison survives. And the sheriff, I don't remember which state, was able to buy himself a beach house with the money he saved by feeding the inmates essentially a diet of starch. So the type of thing that just, if eaten, just pap, just beige mush. I don't even know what was in it. Is it a type of bread substitute? Is it a mixture of potatoes and corn that just becomes beige? But it was beige. And to be fed a diet of something that consists primarily of carbs, and that's it, and there's no variety, there's no nutritional breadth to what you're consuming, and nobody cares because you're in prison, and people do not form a loud enough collective voice to say what's happening. Let's get some journalists on there. The journalists can sense an appetite for people to read and hear about this type of corruption. When there's no appetite for a story, the journalists don't follow the story, and the corruption isn't exposed until the sheriff has already paid for his beach house and people have suffered for years. So at least that corruption was exposed eventually. I think the sheriff, because he could say he did it legally, I don't know that he experienced any consequences for that. But I just know that my whole soul shuddered to think that Americans are so dismissive of people who have committed a crime that their human rights could be ignored to that extent without anybody kicking up a fuss for years. That there weren't any relatives of the prisoners whistleblowing to say, why is everybody in this prison being force-fed, well, not force-fed, but being fed a very restrictive, limited diet that's nutritionally depriving people, leaving them crazy because it leaves you twitchy if you're malnourished. Your body systems don't function as effectively, and your emotions aren't as well regulated if you don't have stable blood sugar levels. Pompous Magnus is noting that some people on Fox News, Shep Smith and Chris Wallace, are criticizing Trump. So Shep Smith had been doing it for a while, I think, but Chris Wallace is an addition, which is we do get excited anytime we hear that Fox News are exposing their viewers to a little bit of reality. We do get excited for that because it implies that the tide is turning and that perhaps Fox News senses that and is shifting their allegiance away from Trump. We may be wrong about that. But if you put it together with other bits of information, Jake Tapper is definitely being more adversarial to blatant liars instead of just passively allowing lies to go unchallenged. He challenged Jim Jordan, who was lying about what happened in Ukraine. He said that's not what happened. It's not the case. And that was a big deal to me, to see Jake Tapper, who has this reputation as being a good journalist, but still often allows liars to lie, allows Kellyanne Conway to lie, etc., without adequately challenging their lies. So it was feeling like there was a bit more robustness in the pushback of reputable journalists. If they were feeling more determined in their ability to hold Trump to account and hold Trump enablers to account, then that shows that this dam is breaking, that steam is gathering apace behind impeachment and the need to expose Trump's crimes, which have been going on for a while. Trump has spent a long time abusing the might of the American nation, its militaristic might, its economic might, to try to hold other nations hostage, specifically Ukraine, which is under attack by Russia, which is dependent on military aid from its ally, America, an ally that convinced Ukraine years ago to give up nuclear weapons that it had after the dissolution of USSR. And Ukraine said it might be handy to keep these nuclear weapons in case we ever need to defend ourselves from Russia. Russia might get the idea that it can just absorb us back into Russia. And America promised, said, no, give up your nuclear weapons and we will protect you. We will be the deterrence for Russia to not invade you. Well, that deterrence hasn't worked out for Ukraine. Their faith in the US was misplaced. They still try to believe in you because you're their only hope, Obi-Wan Kenobi. They still are hoping you'll pull through. And Trump did eventually deliver, or stop blocking, the Congress bipartisan delivered $391 million of military aid. It was 250 initially, but 140 extra million got added to it. I don't know if that was just an inducement or a sweetener that Trump devised himself, but maybe Congress just went, let's add some more money to that pile. Pompeius Magnus says, on diet issues, I believe that was in certain Alabama country jails, not state prisons. In some southern states, country sheriffs exercise their office as a personal fiefdom. Yes. Thank you too for participating in a conversation. That is nice to get some interplay between what I'm saying and what you're responding with. If you are able to like the broadcast, that also helps YouTube in its promotion of the broadcast. It will share this as a suggested video to watch with other people if you click the thumbs up button, I believe. That's for next time if you make another visit back to this channel, or if you subscribe, because I will probably go to bed now. It's later for me than it is for Americans. I hope the news is being kind to everybody today, that Trump doesn't lash out in any way that you might expect from a cornered animal, particularly if the cornered animal was... Actually, I don't want to go with the analogy of an animal, because I'm stoutly opposed to dehumanizing our political opponents. Trump does it to minority groups, and you can see that people are losing empathy for others when they're so angry at the actions of the Trump administration that they start to say those people aren't even human. They are human, and humans are just very capable of bad behavior. We have to acknowledge that. We don't need to dehumanize people and say they're like animals, because what that does, and it's done it over and over again in history, is legitimize the murder of people, legitimize war, legitimize aggression. We don't need to cultivate aggression on our side. There's enough aggression in the world. I'm not a pacifist who says you should sit back and let people attack you. I just think we can condemn bad, malicious, aggressive behavior without using animal analogies that have, historically speaking, facilitated mass murder and mass slaughter. So in the Rwandan Hutu versus Tutsis conflict, they called, I'm going to get my tribes wrong, but they called the Tutsis cockroaches, I believe. Jewish people were likened to rats and vermin and cockroaches, I believe. Bret Stephens tried to claim that Jewish people were called bedbugs, but I don't think that's true. He just didn't personally being likened to a bedbug when the news broke that there was an infestation of bedbugs at the New York Times, and an academic made a small joke on his Twitter account to say Bret Stephens is the bedbug. And Bret Stephens wrote to that academic's boss, to CC'd him on an email saying, "Dear academic, perhaps you would like to make that comment to my face. You could come over to my house and meet my wife and children and then call me a bedbug to my face. CC, your boss."